Ukraine's president, heading back to our main story, or one of our main stories of the day, has issued an urgent plea to Russia for peace talks as fighting escalates across the country. Joining me is Quincy Institute Fellow and co-host of American Prestige, Daniel Bessner. Daniel, a very good morning to you, our time. What do you make of the latest request from the Ukraine president?
Well, it makes a lot of sense if you're Zelensky. If you're Zelensky, I think at this point you want to get as many resources and assets from the so-called West in order to continue to make really the Russian invasion as difficult as it's been. So it makes sense. He wants to force terms. He wants to get the best terms for his country. He wants to make it clear that this couldn't happen in the future or shouldn't happen in the future. There are larger geostrategic issues, though, related to whether it's in the quote-unquote West's interest to do that, that I think we have to discuss. But Zelensky's request makes total sense if you're, him right now.
Yeah, and he's making a fairly direct plea to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, to be involved personally with these talks.
Yeah, I think that he's hoping to do is basically use the relatively slow Russian invasion, which I think by this point it's fair to say was much slower and much less effective than people might have predicted beforehand, to force Putin to the table and to force Putin to the table to agree to terms that are in Zelensky's and Ukraine's perceived benefits. Whether that happens or not, it's difficult to know, because it's difficult to really know what's going on, of course, in Putin's mind, but what's going on in terms of the small elite that seems to have a significant say on the course and direction of Russian foreign policy.
Evil dictators like Putin always end up in a bad way. But how does it happen? We've seen the President of the United States, Joe Biden, call him a war criminal. It's a bit different, this one, isn't it? Because it's an extraordinary situation when you've got a country of the size and strength of Russia.
It is a very extraordinary situation. And personally, I try not to use language like evil, because I think it's important when one is making foreign policy is to try to at least empathize strategically, not in terms of the goals and not in terms of the morals of what foreign leaders do, but try to get a sense of their thinking. And it does seem to me that Putin basically thought that he would use this invasion as a way to ensure either that Ukraine becomes part, whether formal or informal, of Russia, or to ensure that it remains neutral. Now, the problem, of course, is that Russia is, I've seen it described, and I think it's accurate. It's a major power, but it's not really a great power. It's not as powerful as it was when it, was part of the Soviet Union and essentially directed a lot of Soviet foreign policy. But though it's sort of a middling economic power, it has the weapons of a great power, particularly in terms of its nuclear arsenal. So this is why I think Western leaders have tread relatively carefully in terms of, for example, refusing to impose a no-fly zone or transfer jets to Ukraine, because they don't want to risk escalation over an issue that is, in their opinion, of relatively tertiary interest to their physical security. Now, it's different whether you're talking about the United States, which is very far away from Ukraine and Russia, whether you're talking about Poland, which is very close, or whether you're talking about Germany, which is closer to Poland, but not quite on the border of Russia. So I think there's a lot of different interests happening right now, a lot of different thoughts happening right now that relate to people's different position in this grand geostrategic structure.
What about an off-ramp for someone like Putin? And I use the words evil, maybe not so much about what's happening now, although there's just cause, but the way that he treats his own people in Russia and has done for quite some time. But what about an off-ramp? Because they need to give an off-ramp for him to back down, because otherwise they won't.
I think that's precisely right. I think you need some sort of off ramp that makes clear that the interested parties are taking Putin's security concerns seriously, that makes clear that Ukraine, at least in the foreseeable future, is going to not be formally aligned with NATO or with the European Union. Now, of course, this is problematic because in an ideal world, the democratic citizens of Ukraine, the citizens of Ukraine would be able to make their own decisions. But I think what this event has demonstrated is that the geopolitics of the 1990s and 2000s are no longer, that you're going to have quote unquote revisionist powers like Russia do things like invade countries that they think are crucial to their security interests. So I think that you have to basically include all parties to this discussion, but really it's about providing Putin with a quote unquote off ramp that he is able to take in order for him to save face and to achieve as well some of his major strategic objectives. Even if we wish the world was different, even if we wish that autocratic leaders weren't able to use force to get what they want.
Absolutely, and it's been a failure in so many ways. The invasion, as you mentioned earlier, it's gone slower. Large cities have, barely been an impact. Ukraine very much well in control, but other parts like Mariupol have been decimated. How does this end? I know it's how long's a piece of string kind of question, but how long does this take to get some kind of resolution? Because even if Russia took over the Ukraine, it's a country of 48 million people. There's no way they're going to get their obedience.
Yeah, I think that's right. To my mind, the worst possible outcome is that engenders some sort of long war where there's an insurgency and a counterinsurgency, and there's attempts at occupation, and there's incredible violence and death, particularly for the Ukrainian people. So ideally, what the best case scenario is that the slow course of the Russian invasion, or the relatively slow course of the Russian invasion, will actually force Putin to the table, and will force Putin to the table in a way that allows him to make decisions about ending the war that will be of immediate benefit to people who are suffering from it. So that's what I hope. But it would be terrible if this results in a form of civil war, if this results in a Syria-like situation where you get years and years of violence with really no end in sight. And that could happen, and I really hope it does not.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, one of the things on the side of hopefully a resolution sooner rather than later is the fact that, and it's the first time we've really seen it, is that Russia's being economically strangled by sanctions, which could really help in the long run.
I think that's right, and I think it's important to understand sanctions as really a form of war. They're not really clean wars as they have been portrayed in the past, but they do inflict significant suffering not only on Russian elites but also on people at large. And so this is a serious action taken by the United States and other countries, and it'll be interesting to see to what degree that action shapes geopolitics in the future. I wish I knew more about Putin's calculation before the invasion and what he thought was going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, look forward to catching up with you again soon on Weekend Edition. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.